Ihor Romanenko, founder of the Close the Sky of Ukraine Charitable Foundation and Lieutenant General, is joining us. Ihor Alexandrovich, welcome. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Greetings to you and our viewers.
The more frequent attempts, well, I don't know, to call them sabotage groups, advancing on the northern borders, Sumy, Kharkiv region. From your point of view, what is the nature of these attacks? How dangerous are they? To what extent should the defense forces of Ukraine increase their attention to the northern borders? Does Russia have the potential to create serious tension there?
It's as dangerous as the implementation of the second concept for seizing our territories regarding buffer zones is happening. Putin calls them sanitary zones. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that as a result of these actions, basically a part of the territory that is adjacent to our border is being seized. And this is being done in order to form a corresponding belt of this kind. Obviously, this means it's not in the plans of our units of the parts of the Ukrainian defense forces operating there. Therefore, there is corresponding resistance. However, it comes back in this case to the resources that the enemy has, both in terms of personnel, weapons, equipment, and ammunition, and what forces we have to counter this in defense, as well as to conduct active defense. That is, to carry out counterattacks in certain sectors. And furthermore, the priority remains the concept of first capturing the territories of the 4 regions that they included by illegally amending their constitution. Therefore, it is clear that they still maintain specific priorities regarding these ongoing actions in these particular regions. Consequently, they're actively concentrating their available resources there, but they are certainly not forgetting about the strategic formation of these so-called buffer zones, which are being established primarily within the Sumy and Kharkiv regions.
Igor Alexandrovich, a new video has appeared here. It's been quite a while since we've seen this, but now footage has started appearing again from that Rostov-Simferopol highway, and specifically from the Berdyansk-Mariupol section. This is the exact location that was pointed out where trucks and fuel tankers are burning. Yeah, judging by the nature of the fire, it's clear that these are fuel and lubricants. To what extent is this highway, the so-called Novorossiya, not only used in the Russians' attempts to supply fuel to Crimea, but also providing fuel to the southern sections of the front? In other words, to what extent is it considered, or can it be considered, a main highway? Or are there any alternative logistical routes to bring fuel closer to the line of contact for the occupiers?
I would say that a second phase of operations is emerging here. On one hand, for the Russians along this Novorossiya highway, we remember that their soldiers, due to the active operations of our corresponding strike assets, Hornet unmanned aerial vehicles, American drones, which mean with memory, with artificial intelligence, and thus actively destroyed, especially fuel trucks and transport vehicles. So after this specific situation developed, the Russians started looking for various ways to counter it. That is, they brought in their mobile groups, they repainted and camouflaged the vehicles traveling along this route at night, and for the most part, they grouped this transport together. They also deployed military personnel with rifles in order to secure the area, and so on. It was a calculated effort to mitigate the risks they were facing on the ground, and they were clearly trying to adapt their strategy to the changing circumstances. Well, at some stage, the situation improved for him, but only slightly. And therefore, the next stage of application here is not just against fuel trucks, but against other military transport that is moving, and drones that have undergone so-called training. This is very important because it's a unique opportunity for us in the defense forces of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the Russians have it too, but they apply it to themselves, well, to such few allies. But as for information about these assets, both aerial and ground-based, we can and do share it with certain companies of our allies who are engaged in this kind of training. There are already known facts where, for example, long haul truckers themselves bring in drones on their vehicles that are trained, and when their specific transport is encountered on the road, that is, a fuel truck or a large cargo truck, well, a military target, it takes off and strikes, and in this way destroys it. Therefore, well, it is obvious that there is action and counteraction from both sides. And this is a new stage in which the defense forces of Ukraine are once again increasing their effectiveness, which leads to the fact that a significant portion of the transport on this road is being destroyed. And that ominous name, the Road of Death, as it was once grimly called by the soldiers of the Russian army, is now being recalled once again, and it is slowly returning to the front lines.
I want to recall today's tragic events in Kherson, a tragic episode. A Russian drone strike on a minibus in Kherson, which resulted in the deaths of 4 people. Obviously, we understand perfectly well what the choice of such targets and the Russian tactic of terror, which continues, speaks to. Yes, right now, our viewers can see the results and consequences. And as I already said, footage of this tragic, terrible episode from the city of Kherson. And in fact, this isn't the first time we've seen such footage, is it? Of this nature, where we have heard more than once how the Russian army, the Russian occupiers, are essentially staging a safari on people. Yes, when drones pursue people in open areas and farmers as well. Take that recent video, for example, which is also quite difficult to watch, where a family of farmers is in their field and there's a tractor there and everything. And the mother also starts screaming that they need to run because a drone is flying in. Well, the goal is clear. What kind of strategy is this? That word is inappropriate. This is absolute terror. It's understandable, as Russia has acted this way from the very first days. What should we do, Igor Alexandrovich? What should Ukraine do in order to, well, let's say, minimize the Russians' capabilities in this aspect? In this way, both staging safaris on people in Kherson and carrying out such strikes on transport in the city.
If we say there are two directions, active and passive, the active approach means that units, service members, and parts of the Ukrainian defense forces must carry out protection against aerial attack assets. And here it is necessary to master technologies as quickly as possible. That is our direction here, unequivocally. That is, technology that will be more effective with the presence and use of artificial intelligence, and in this way, protect both our own military and civilians. And other things, under these conditions, we see that the enemy is not standing still either. They are improving their assets. They are penetrating deeper and deeper into our country. There is already confirmation that, for example, the Shahed Garan 5, that is, both Garan 4 and Garan 5, are Shaheds, unmanned strike aerial vehicles with jet engines. And while the Garan 5 is basically a drone missile, let's say, that can fly up to 900 kilometers. And for the first time, it appeared in the western regions of our country, where it was shot down. But the fact remains, Flash Beskresnov was talking about these capabilities of the enemy, that they would improve, and we are seeing that. Not to mention what is happening close to the line of contact. This is across the Dnieper. This is our long-suffering Kherson. Therefore, it's necessary to strengthen the issues related to protection there. The same next, and in general, to organize an air defense system where the state, unfortunately, is not coping. Citizens themselves also need to think through issues related to safety and participating in air defense activities. Unfortunately, I am forced to talk about this because the situation there is very difficult, complicated in the Kharkiv region, in the Sumy region, and in Kherson, especially in these areas. Recently, Odessa, especially the port area, has been added to this. Therefore, there are ways and there is a direction, and we need to organize ourselves and resolve these issues. Interaction, of course, with the units of the defense forces of Ukraine. However, we need to think through protection issues for those people who remain there, and also keep in mind the latest means. Well, at the moment, this is how it looks.
I will continue our conversation with a quote. Ukraine must seize the strategic initiative on land, at sea, in the air, and in the information space. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine, I emphasize, the new Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Yevhen Kamara, stated this during a speech in the Verkhovna Rada. According to him, that is precisely why it is necessary to strengthen the army, develop human capital, and the defense industrial complex. Next, we'll hear a direct quote, and then we'll talk.
We must achieve an advantage on the front line through the ingenuity and professionalism of our commanders, the training of our soldiers, innovation, and modern weaponry. We have three key priorities of equal importance. These are the front line and strengthening the army, our people, and the development of the defense industry.
Strengthening the front on land, at sea, in the air, and in the information space. A fourth area has been added. Why is it so important to also fight the Russians in the information space? What do you think?
Because the information component of a large-scale war has always been, is, and will remain a very important component and requires great efforts in this sphere from any state. The history of various kinds of wars shows this. And we, unfortunately, have our own experience since 2014, and especially at the stage of the large-scale war. And we see how important it is to maintain the spirit of our service members, to engage in volunteering, to donate, to interact with our military with the goal of maintaining the level, and even better, to act in such a way and raise this potential of the defense forces of Ukraine, which the new minister is talking about. And here it is necessary to clearly understand that the role of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine consists of providing support, starting with political support, including informational support, financial support, and most importantly, personnel. That is, citizens who must be drafted and transferred to the armed forces. I emphasize these functions, they are even divided in this way according to our current legislation. And at the moment, this function has been shifted to the armed forces. That is, they have to find these people somewhere in the state using the recruitment center. Moreover, this is being handled by a branch of the armed forces, the ground forces, which do not have the authority according to the law. Therefore, I think for the new minister and the commander-in-chief, and it's not even their function, this should be decided by the president and the government, because regarding mobilization, only the government can have the full picture. If digitization has been carried out there, that means the registration of citizens and so on. To say in which industry in general where we have and what number of those who are subject to mobilization, and to make the appropriate decisions. And at the level lower to the command of a branch of the armed forces, there is no such information. They simply cannot objectively be effective. Therefore, if we are serious about implementing mobilization, that means replenishing the units that are understaffed. That means changing the situation that the new minister is talking about. That is both people and resources and weaponry and everything else. Only then, and technology, of course, only then can the initiative be changed, return to the defense forces of Ukraine, and we can achieve significant results in this war and force the enemy to move to real peace negotiations on suspending hostilities.
Igor Alexandrovich, thank you for your opinion. Thank you for being with us. Igor Romanenko, founder of the Close the Sky of Ukraine Charitable Foundation, the Lieutenant General, was on the line with the Freedom Studio.